Hi everyone, John O'Neill Sr. here, and I'm super excited to be participating in this edition of MVP Days. Today we are going to take a look at managed service accounts. Everything from virtual accounts to group managed service accounts we're going to cover, and we're actually going to go ahead and create some of those accounts, and you'll see just how easy it is to get better control and management of your users and your user accounts. Group managed service accounts and managed service accounts are a great way to avoid that security faux pas of using a normal user account, setting its password to not expire, and then using that to run services on different machines. That's something we absolutely don't want to do, and there's an easy enough way around it. So with that, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
All right, let's jump right into this. So looking at this from a different perspective, let's consider for a second, what is the dilemma we face? What are we trying to accomplish when we set out on this group managed service account journey? Well, first off, I want everyone to understand that the concept of least privilege, right? That security tenet that we've heard for years, it applies to services just like it applies to everything else. So user accounts, we've been applying the concept of least privilege for quite a while now. Well, same thing goes for services. Using an admin level account with a non-expiring password, I don't care if it's in the context of your admin user account or in the context of a service account where you've assigned this account to run a service, is just an absolutely horrendous idea. And in fact, one thing we never want to do is use the enterprise admin account with a non-expiring password. Finally, when we talk about passwords and keeping them from non-expiring, the problem that we face is that we can never keep up with changing the password for every service account out there. That's just too big of a challenge. So let me put down a challenge for the outcome of this session. First, we're going to run our services with an account that is easily managed. So nothing that we have a challenge really trying to maintain over time or anything like that. We're going to ensure that every service account has regularly maintained password changes so it stays secure. None of this non-expiring password nonsense. Finally, we're going to limit the ability of the accounts that are running services on our machines to not performing any normal user type activities. So what that means in IT vernacular is we're not going to allow any of these accounts to log on interactively. That's it. That's the challenge for this session, and I hope everybody agrees at the end of it that we have stepped up and met that challenge across the board. What are these group managed service accounts that we're really talking about anyway? Well, let's step back in time for a second and realize that their development was evolutionary. It didn't just happen, boom, at the spur of the moment. In Windows 2008 R2, Windows Server 2008 R2, MSAs, managed service accounts, came out. Problem was they had a few limitations. Well, in 2012, Windows Server 2012, group managed service accounts were released and they addressed those limitations. Primary among them, GMSAs are able to run scheduled tasks. They're able to be used on multiple devices, so multiple hosts, and they can even be used for things like IIS application pulls. What are the requirements for implementing group managed service accounts? Well, first off, goes without saying, we have to use Active Directory. Since GMSAs are created within Active Directory, like I said, that only makes sense. We also have to extend our Active Directory schema up to Windows Server 2012, because remember what I mentioned earlier, Windows Server 2012 is when or where group managed service accounts were created. The machines where we're going to use these group managed service accounts, well, those have to be either Windows Server 2012 or Windows 8 or a later OS. Finally, you'll want to have PowerShell and the PowerShell Active Directory module on any computers where you're going to be creating or using group managed service accounts. Now, there is one more key requirement, excuse the pun, you'll get what I mean in a minute, that is required for utilizing group managed service accounts. GMSAs rely on Active Directory's key distribution subsystem, so we have to generate a root key for a forest. We only do this once per forest, so it's not something you have to like remember how to implement into your workflow or anything like that. You just have to make sure it's done the very first time before you create your very first GMSA. Now, the PowerShell commandlet is simply add -Kts Root Key and then space -effective immediately. I should mention here that Microsoft's version of effective immediately really means do it now, go home, wait until tomorrow, come back, and then carry on. That's because it really is best practice and standard procedure to wait at least 10 hours after issuing this command. That allows for replication to take place and everything to transfer in even the most robust and diverse AD forests. Now, if you're doing this in a lab, as we're going to do here in a little bit, it is possible to force the key to be immediately available, and we do that using the same PowerShell commandlet, except instead of effective immediately, we set an actual effective time of 10 hours previous to when we issue the command. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. Like I mentioned, best practice, standard procedure. When you do this in your live environments, wait at least 10 full hours for replication to occur. What I recommend everybody does is you issue the command today, you carry on tomorrow. That way you're absolutely sure to be safe. When group managed service accounts came into being in Windows Server 2012, a new class was added to our AD schema. This is why we have to extend it to that level. In that class, we have a number of very important new attributes. The first of which is MSDS-group MSA membership. This attribute governs which computers or groups of computers are allowed to retrieve the service account password and make use of the group managed service account. We also have a number of password-related attributes, the first being MSDS-manage password, which is really just something that contains the current password, the previous password, and the change interval between them. There's managed password interval, or MSDS-managed password interval, I should say, which this is created or configured when you create an account. It can't be changed later, and it determines how often the password has to be changed. The next two, MSDS-manage password ID and MSDS-manage password previous ID, are the key identifier used by the key distribution service, KDS, to generate the current password, and the key identifier that was used in the previous passwords generation. It's not critical to know these to be able to deploy and use GMSAs, but I think it's great to have in the background so that you have a good understanding of what's going on when you deploy these in your environment. 3 steps exist for us to go from 0 to hero with group managed service accounts. The first we just went over, and that is to create the Kts Root Key. As I mentioned, this is a one-time per forest event, so really once we do this the first time, there are only 2 steps to being a hero with GMSAs. But I get ahead of myself. So the next step after we have that Kts Root Key and we've waited those 10 hours for it to replicate is we go ahead and create and configure a group managed service account. I'm going to get into the commandlets and exactly how to do that in a moment. Finally, once it is created and configured in Active Directory, we go ahead and configure the group managed service account on the hosts. Again, we're going to look at the specific commandlets involved, and we're actually going to go ahead and do that in our lab. All right, let's pause just a second and talk about a common tip for success. When managing your computers and their association with GMSAs, go ahead and use your AD groups. This allows you much easier administration of the ins and outs of computers that will be allowed to use a group managed service account or shouldn't use it anymore, that sort of thing. It also empowers your help desk or other teammates who may not necessarily have access to run the commandlets to associate a GMSA with a computer account. Well, they can add that computer account into a group or take it out. And therefore, they are, in a sense, managing associations of GMSAs with computer accounts. Just a little tip for success. We're going to take a quick peek at the key commandlets used with group managed service accounts. Now, don't worry too much about this part because we're going to do all this live fire in a lab in just a moment. But I wanted you to have a good documentation of what these commandlets are and give you a couple little notes about them. So the new -AD service account commandlet is the commandlet that we're going to use to create our group managed service account. Some of you may have worked with the older school MSAs, managed service accounts. Well, you'll notice that this is the same commandlet. So by default, this commandlet creates a group managed service account. But if you add the -standalone parameter to it, it would go ahead and create one of those old school MSAs. That really doesn't apply to what we're talking about today since we're working with group managed service accounts, but I wanted to mention it. The other thing I wanted to mention about this commandlet is that if you run this and you get a key does not exist type error, that means one of two things. Either you forgot to run that Kts Root Key creation commandlet once in your AD forest, or you didn't wait the full 10 hours for replication to occur after you ran it. It's important that you do those things. I know I've mentioned it a bunch of times, but I can't mention it enough because it really is critical to the success going forward. Parameter-wise, everything is pretty much self-explanatory here. I'll take a peek at a couple things. That first parameter that I want to go through is the -DNS hostname. This is really what you want to think of as the fully qualified domain name of your service account. So for easy purposes here, take your service account name, the name you just gave it, and add .domain name to the end of it. So in this case, if our domain name, our Active Directory domain name was tm360.com, our -DNS hostname value would be myawesomegmsa.tm360.com, since myawesomegmsa is what I named this service account. The final parameter you see there of principals allowed to retrieve managed password, this is the association with a group or a computer, and you can see I've associated it with a group in this case. If you didn't associate your group managed service account with a computer or with a group, or if you wanted to change that after the fact, you'd use the set-AD service account commandlet. Once that group managed service account is created and configured, associated with a computer object or a group, you want to go ahead and install that on the actual host where you're going to use it. So this could be another Windows Server 2012 server, Server 2016 server, a Windows 10 workstation, whatever it is where you're going to put this and put it to work. On that machine, you will run the install-AD service account commandlet. The only parameter you really need to give it is the name of the group managed service account. If you get an error when you run this commandlet, here's a tip. Odds are you probably recently added this computer to the group that you're using to manage your GMSA associations. Well, you need to reboot this computer before this commandlet will work. So if this commandlet throws an error, just reboot this host, try the commandlet again, and I bet you more than likely your error will go away and everything will be peachy. Final commandlet I want to mention very quickly is the test-AD service account commandlet. You can run this on the host, and if it returns a value of true, then everything is golden. Your account is created and associated and ready to rock and roll. If it returns false, then you usually will get a pretty verbose error that will point you in the direction of what you've got going on and messing things up. When using the services GUI interface, it's pretty straightforward, but there are a couple things to know. First off, of course, we start services.msc to get the console up Once that's up, we go ahead and find our service in the list and then edit its properties. On the Log On tab, it's important to set the account to the group managed service account name, and you're going to enter that in the form of domain name / service account name. Make sure you put the $ at the end of the GMSA name. Finally, and this is the most important part, remove all information, absolutely everything, not even a space, inside the password and confirm password dialog boxes. This is critical because it is kind of the switch that tells the system that, hey, this is going to be a group managed service account and I'm going to pull the password out of Active Directory. All right, let's jump into the lab and get to work. I'm logged in here on my Windows 10 Enterprise build 1809 lab machine. It's completely up to date with patches, and I've gone ahead and installed some of the tools that I regularly use in the lab. Things like Chrome and PS Core, VS Code. Most importantly for us today, though, is the RSAT, the Windows 10 build 1809 Remote Server Administration Toolkit. The RSAT brings to my workstation all those GUI tools and PowerShell tools that I might normally RDP over to a server just so I can run. It's a lot safer to run these things on your workstation. And if you have a server core implementation, which we all know server core rocks as far as performance goes compared to a GUI enabled version of Windows Server, well, server core has to be administered through PowerShell or through the use of the RSAT from a workstation. Okay, enough about that. The first thing I want to do is kind of show you where we're at. I'm going to go ahead and start up dsa.msc, or Active Directory Users and Computers, to give it its display name, so to speak. And you'll notice that I have an OU called AWS_users. In it, I have 2 users and a security group. And in that security group, my workstation, this Windows 10 machine right here, has been joined to it. And the reason this group exists is because of what we talked about earlier during the slides. I want to administer things using a group. It just makes it simpler in the long run. So that's why we have our group here, and this is the group name that we're going to use when we associate our GMSA later. All right, let's exit out of there. We will run an elevated PowerShell prompt. Now, once I'm in my PowerShell session, I need to go ahead and get into a remote session over to my Windows domain controller. Now, that machine happens to be a Windows Server 2019 DC, but the forest functional level and the domain functional level are Windows Server 2016. Of course, all that is okay because the schema extensions we need appear in any version of Server 2012 and later. I'll use the enter-ps session commandlet to get into an interactive remote session. I'm connected over to my DC. We can tell because the computer name is in front of my PowerShell prompt. And now I'm going to go ahead and use that add-Kts Root Key commandlet to generate my root key. Remember, I only have to do this one time per forest. That's it. Notice it returns a GUID and we're done. Because I use that little -effective time parameter trick, subtracting 10 hours from right now this minute, I can go ahead and proceed immediately. But, and I say this with the biggest amount of sincerity I can come up with, only use this trick in the lab. In your live environments, use the -effective immediately and give it that 10 hours. I know, immediately 10 hours, it doesn't make sense, but just remember that's what you have to do. Okay, our next step is to go ahead and create our AD service account, our GMSA. So we'll do that using the new -AD service account commandlet. Whew, that's a long commandlet, but we got it. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter there. Boom, all done. Okay, so now we've created that new group managed service account. We've associated it with that AWS marketing group I showed you earlier that has my computer joined to that group as a member. So now all we need to do is install the AD service account on the local workstation where I'm going to use the GMSA. In this case, it's going to be my Windows 10 machine, so it's time to get out of our remote session on Arista. Now, in a live environment, I would have scripted all this. but I wanted to do it interactively so we could talk about it as we go through it. All right, now I'm back on a PowerShell host that's running on my machine. There's my commandlet for install-AD service account. And of course, I put the service account name that we just created. So let's go ahead and hit enter and see what happens. Wait a minute. We got an error. Oh, bet you thought I wasn't expecting that. Well, in this case, I was. I wanted you to see what would happen when we don't reboot the computer after we join something to a group, right? We have to reboot the computer so that it picks up that new security context. You might remember we discussed that during the slides, but I wanted you to see it first thing. So hang on, I'm going to reboot the computer and I'll be right back with you. I'm back. We're all rebooted, so now let's go ahead and open up another elevated PowerShell host and execute our install-AD service account commandlet. Same commandlet as last time. Let's just hope we have a little better results. Oh, and look at that. Perfect. It's amazing what a little reboot can do. Okay, with that said, the next thing we're going to do is use that test AD service account commandlet to verify that this is all associated and ready to go. It's as simple as it sounds. We got true, we're ready to go. If there had been a problem, we would have received false and an error message to try and point us in the right direction of what was going on. Okay, with this done, we're ready to start using our group managed service account, putting it to work, right? That's why we did all this. So I'm going to go ahead and exit this PowerShell session. And first thing I want to do is go through how we would set up this account on a service using services.msc. So it's simple enough. I can just type in my search box and run my services app. Now, when it comes up here, I would normally be using this for some specific application which had installed a service. This machine doesn't really have anything extra on it, just the built-in stuff. So we'll just pick a service here, the clipboard user service, for instance. And if I come over to the logon tab, you'll see that we get this account option. Now, what we want to do is enter in our service account name. Notice I put a $sign at the end and I put the NetBIOS name of the domain at the front side. Okay, and then we would apply this and hit OK, and it would run under this group managed service account. Again, this is a built-in system account, so I really don't want to change this. I'll go ahead and cancel out, but I wanted to show you the steps. Let's exit services. And now we'll go ahead and take a look at creating a scheduled task using this group managed service account. First, let me show you the commandlet that we're going to run. It's in this little file here. It's a script file. And I've set a few parameters that then I use when I actually create the scheduled task. I have the action, which you'll notice it starts PowerShell, and then it runs a get-event log command and puts it in a CSV file. The next thing I'll tell it is what my principal is, or the user account, the group managed service account that we created, and I add a description to it. And then I use that register scheduled task command to go ahead and create this. Now, what I'll do here, for simplicity's sake, so that we can see this go, is I'll just copy all this. I'll open an elevated PowerShell prompt, and then I'll paste it in and execute it. That way we can see line by line kind of what happens. That's it. We're done. It created the scheduled task. So now let's go see what happens when we look at that scheduled task. Here it is, event log dump. And if you notice, the GMSA is right here as the user account to run this under. So let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. I'll right-click that scheduled task and I'll say run. This is just to save us from having to get back together at 11 p.m. when it would run automatically. Okay, with that complete, we'll exit out of Task Scheduler and we'll come back to our scripts directory on this PC, and there's our CSV. And if I open it up, you'll see I have a ton of information because it dumped the event log. All right, I can exit out of all this stuff, close my PowerShell prompt, close my VS Code editor. That's a wrap, folks. That's it. We're all done for this session on group managed service accounts. I hope you've enjoyed it. You learned a little bit, and you're excited to get in the lab and test it out so that you can start taking advantage of group managed service accounts in your live network environment. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Take care. Have a great day.